We are grateful for the opportunity to have listened and learned from the paper presentations. Indeed, the paper presenters this morning highlighted how diverse voices enrich our understanding, challenge our assumptions, and ultimately lead us to a more comprehensive understanding of God and the world. Another significant part of our program is about to commence as the fourth plenary session, and so it is my honor to introduce to you our moderator for this afternoon. Friends, ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome our moderator, Professor, our Chairman of the Board, Professor Danilo S. Alterado, Ph.D., with a warm-up applause.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you have enjoyed and took an opportunity to recharge yourselves during our lunch. And as we return to our session, let us dive to another discourse with our fourth keynote lecture. Our speaker is the incoming chair of the Department of Indo-Pacific Studies of the University of Hawaii, studied partly at the University of Santo Tomas in Manila, and taught there and taught here for several years before moving to the University of the Philippines, where he eventually finished his further studies and where he taught for years before migrating to the United States. In 2020, he received the United States Fulbright Scholarship. He has received awards from Carlos Palanca Literary Prize, the Republic of the Philippines Centennial Literary Prize, the Cultural Center of the Philippines, the Commission on the Filipino Language, the Belmonte Grant for Nobel, and the Rizal Awards in the United States. He received various commendations in communication, research, and education. His Fulbright Award brought him to St. Louis University as a visiting lecturer in 2022. He was twice appointed visiting professor at the University of the Philippines, Baguio. He served as a faculty associate of the UP Institute of Creative Writing. His degrees are in the classics, Philippine Studies, Philosophy, and Business Administration. His publications are in lexicography, indigenous studies, philosophy, poetry, fiction, and cultural studies. Please join me in welcoming Professor Aurelio Agcaoili, as we are honored to have him today, as his lecture will delve on dynamic interplay between faith and reason in our modern, technologically advanced society, entitled "The Divine is Never Dead: Faith and Reason in the Age of Science, Technology, and Culture." Friends, join me in welcoming Professor Dr. Aurelio Solver Agcaoili with a warm round of applause.
I think by the second day, we have to keep on diminishing. And by the third day, there probably are going to be only 10 people left. This is good, okay? This is called the tapering of the human spirit. Okay, thank you. Dr. Alterado is my adding. I've known him for something like 237 years. So we really have known each other for so long. And we complete each other's sentences, by the way. And then let me announce that I have here a technical assistant in the person of Professor Mark. I'll be giving the command, like, next slide, please, because I was worried that I'm not going to be looking at your faces, because for the last 2 days, I heard people snoring. You can't do it. And in this gallery, I am considering you as my students, and this is my classroom. no can. And that's a threat. All right? I know how to do the argumentum ad baculum, and that's in Latin. It's an argument, which is, of course, fallacious. And the investment, the capital is threat and fear and trembling. I still know my Latin, Dr. Alterado. I still know how to conjugate. Even Hebrew, that I got from Father, the one from Letran, I forgot his name, and also Aramaic and Greek and so on. Excuse me. I studied here also some of the time at the University of Santo Tomas Ecclesiastical Faculty. But let me now be formal and be serious without cracking jokes, which I cannot, of course, promise. Okay, in my classes, I had one rule. I have always one rule. You have to laugh in my class, and I will always count how many times you laughed in my class. If you didn't laugh, there will be a diminishing of the grades. Okay, let me begin my sharing with you today by thanking the conveners and organizers of this conference that courageously, without minding that they are wrong, asking me to reframe the issue of God and the world and enter a dialogue with culture, religion, and science at this time that there is a systematic assault on our decency and self-respect as teachers, educators, scientists, cultural workers, and members of faith communities. Like you, culture, science, and religion are three realities that in my personal life have taken permanent residency in my body, heart, and if you believe in the Ilocanos, 4 Ilocano souls. Aristotle, you are wrong. Thomas Aquinas, you repeated the mistake of Aristotle. Don't talk to the Ilocanos, okay? Okay, please allow me to thank, slide please. Okay, please allow me to thank, there's no thanks in there, I don't know. First, this USC Center for Theology, Religious Studies, and Ethics, and the Philippine National Philosophical Research Society for their kind invitation. Of course, this is to thank also the newly elected again. I think he will not be changed, okay? Dr. Jove Aguas. Thank you, sir. You will have to do that forever until you retire, maybe even after you retired, okay? Dr. Joel Sagut, where are you, sir? You are so kind. You melted my hardened heart. Thank you. And of course, my adding Dr. Dexter Alterado, I think he convinced these people at PNRS and the Center for Religion and Theology and this long title, okay, of that office, I can't memorize, okay, that I am probably worth being given the try, okay? You are mistaken, Dr. Alterado, okay? Thank you for that mistake. My teaching life has been one that is a case of lacking in order, which is chaos, which is scientific, and which is good for me. I do not know what order is all about. At certain points, I have taught public policy at our honors program at the University of Hawaii, so I taught students macroeconomics and everything else. So, meaning to say, excuse you, I'm also a social scientist. I know it, and I know how to cheat with accountancy, with accounting. I went as far as managerial accounting with an act of cheating. Right. At a certain point, I taught cultural and literary relations for the entire Southeast Asian countries. If you know Southeast Asia, there are 11. I think you don't know it. And the last country is East Timor. And I was still in the Philippines when I helped fight for the independence of East Timor away from Indonesia. If you don't know the story. And so when I went eventually to the US, I put together a course and I told the university, we need to teach this phenomenon of these 11 countries being colonized by British, Spain, Portugal, of course. Your number one colonizer now, America, right? White colonizers. Now, if you are not beginning to sense where my talk is going, you are correct. At a certain point, I have thought about grammar, literally, and the inflection of words to account new words, new meanings, and new possibilities. This last one, the awareness of words and these words that have what we call the power to lead us to new realities. And what I will do, therefore, in this talk is to bring you along with me the 7 points here. So I already did the point number 1, or I'm going to be done with it after 3 hours. That's point number 1. And then I'm going to be introducing my argument. And I will be zeroing on that argument in my discussion and sharing with you. And on that note, I would like to summon now how the Manuvo people that I am really currently working with, when they say thank you to all of you, and to all these people that I have mentioned, and also to those people who really have helped me along the way as I live my life for the second day at your beautiful university. I cannot recognize it any longer. So among the Manuvo, they would say, Salamat kadiyaw. But among the Ilocano people who have lived for almost 2 decades, it's Mahalo no Wilowa. Okay, Mahalo no Wilowa. And of course, since you know Latin, I'm going to impress you that I still know my conjugation. I would say, gratias tibi ago. Thank you. The real English translation is, thanks to you, I give. Right? You still know your conjugation and declension? Forget it if you have forgotten it, okay? Now, my argument is this. That you cannot not, is there an argument in there? Okay, so the argument now is the second one. The third one, okay, that's the aloha greetings. Can you, okay. This is it. I think we missed that. I don't want to repeat it. I already did that. Okay, Mark, we have to really come in sync, Mark. Okay, okay. Sorry, okay. I missed Professor Dennis. Where are you? Well, thank you that you are absent. Okay, Professor Dennis, I realized that he was my student something like 120 years ago. And then I was looking at him yesterday. I said, I know the student with the kind of a hair that somehow is unruly. I said, hey, but he was so thin when he was my student in political philosophy at the Christ the King Seminary down on Rodriguez Boulevard. I said, I know this, but I can't remember his name, but I can remember his face, but not his body. I said, ah. And then he came close to me and he said, I was your most brilliant student at Christ the King. Well, I know you. Yeah, but then, and then, of course, we got to know each other again after something like 127 years. Thank you, Professor Dennis. I know that he is the big boss now at the Institute of Religion or whatever is that. Dennis, okay? My simple argument is really that simple. I am now skipping my manuscript. That the divine, as the transcendent in human life, locates itself in faith lived in earnest every day, in reason as the anchor upon which people make sense of their experiences, and in the logic of science, technology, and culture. Now, I also argue that STEM, as STEM, does not make sense if it does not include the H it should be, ladies and gentlemen, STEM, which means we need to insert humanities into the discourse, the technique, and the approach of the sciences, technology, engineering, or mathematics. We fail to do that, we will become all zombies and walking dead. You want to become zombie, robot, or walking dead, then leave that H out in the conversation. Now, in fine, the final argument is this, and which is also my goal: the divine, the holy, the transcendent is not dead. It is never dead. Because the divine itself is the transcendent itself. Now, I am now going to my third point in this discussion, and it's actually a cursory survey of how I arrive at this kind of an argument. And I'd like us to maybe go back to Philippine history, and also I will entwine that Philippine history into what you would call what happened during martial law, and I will bring a lot of my own experiences during martial law. When I was younger than you are, I read a lot about spiritual writers like Carlo Carreto's Letters from the Desert, and also Thomas Merton, a lot of this. I also did Charles de Foucauld, and I understood what you would call the spiritual. I remember, for instance, that kind of an incident in Carlo Carreto when he was in the Sahara. It was so cold, the evening was cold, and the wind was whistling, and then he had only one blanket. And there was this Sahara person who was also quivering, and Carlo did not share his blanket. You know what? He would not forget that. This Carlo Carreto, who, like you, started the doctorate in philosophy and eventually ended up mending shoes in the Sahara Desert. I hope all of you will do the same thing, okay? Get out of USD, go to a desert, and mend shoes and hearts and soul, right? Yeah? All right. I forgot to thank Lisa. Lisa, thank you for the evening when we shared the table together last night. Lisa, are you there? Oh, there you go, okay. I was looking at you, okay. Now, at the height of martial law, two things really happened. The Hare Krishna from India came to the Philippines. What was the Hare Krishna all about? What was the gospel? The gospel is be happy. It's like your Jollibee gospel of consumerism, of a thigh of chicken or a breast of chicken, right? Jollibee happiness. Hey, this is martial law, and that's what you are telling us. Just be happy, run around with your drums. When your orange clothing. Something is happening there. When we talked about life, live in earnest in the everyday, we talk about text. But every text has a context, every text has a pretext, every text has a subtext. And a text can be intertextualized. And so, like a good philosopher, you but to always say, I am now summoning a methodic suspicion. I'm not gonna accept what you're saying. I will suspect. And that's methodical. Right? Why did you come here in earnest at the height of martial law? There was a second thing that really happened. There was a time when the Italian congregations were coming in droves to the country. The Italians, so many Italians come in the 70s, 80s, and I think even until today. What's happening? Also, when these Italians came in, these Italian padres and Italian madres forced their novices etc., and seminarians to speak Italian under the guise of internationalism. If you are in an Italian congregation, you've got to talk Italian. Mangiamo a mangiare, spaghettini, there you go. You have to. So, these things really are happening, and we're talking about dialogue. These people, they did not read the Second Vatican Council with something like 1,500 pages. Of course, they did not read, right? Because they were, in fact, forcing these Filipinos who came from the provinces to speak Italian, and in fact, they were punishing them when they would be speaking the Poholano Cebuano. I know this because at a conference in Italy in 1998, I did an empirical study on what happened in this coming in of Italians, and I presented this conference at a conference in Reggio de Calabria, close to Greece. I know what happened. Why? You know, even at this time, don't sleep. I have hot coffee. Europe is losing its Catholic faithful. Europe is closing shop with its convents that really are so majestic, mansions, beautiful structures. Europe is closing shop with its seminaries. And so what they would do, they would go Bavarian in your Sociology 101, right? In your Sociology 101, you say, well, there is misery and wretchedness. There will be faith, right? That's according to Weber, right? Well, there are poor people. There are so many people going in droves to churches because they need God. When you are so wealthy in Europe, you don't need God. And so when you go to Europe, any place in Europe, you are lucky if you have 5 people there, all old people in their 80s, and the 6th one is the priests. Young people, they have cameras taking pictures on everything, inside or outside the churches. Now, during martial law, there were only 2 options. Either you go activists with your banners, sometimes they call them the NBAs, or you go become a seminarian or a madre. That was the only option. The safe one is you become a madre or a seminarian if you don't want to become an activist. Now, what was the prevailing thing in those times when we had what we call the dread of martial law? According to this leftist side of what you call youthful idea of religion, God is an invention of a sick mind. Religion is the refuge of the desperate. And we know what happened. We had problems with what you will call, next slide please, this idea of being positive about everything. If you remember, I think Lisa, you do, we bought this book by Norman Vincent Peale, and he was talking about the only thing we need to do is be positive about a lot of things, right? The power of positive thinking, okay? That kind of a book. This is martial law, and we are being offered the new society, and here comes Vincent Peale telling us with that kind of a gospel from America, you need only to be positive. Right, Lisa? We read that book together, right? The power of positive thinking. Now, on the other hand, we have problems. Bingbong Crisologo was terrorizing everyone he can terrorize. This is 70s, 80s. Now, he burned 2 barrios in Ilocos Sur, Ora Este and Ora Oeste, but there is one bold priest. The name is Father Rabang, who eventually could not take it any longer. He led the People's March from Vigan to Malacanang. The priest is Santos Rabang. Now, at that time, you have the dogs of martial law, and they are called Metrocom. Lisa, you remember them. Some of the Metrocom people were, in fact, student-looking people, but when they were at the University of the Philippines, they would wear white socks. No student at the University of the Philippines would wear white socks. Come on, that's a giveaway. So if you are wearing socks at the University of the Philippines, you are a Metrocom. Come on, okay? You don't have to disguise yourself. Okay, anyways. So Metrocom would run after this priest, Santos Rabang, and then there was no option left for him except to hide in a monastery that nobody knew, but eventually people knew. This is the Trappist monastery in Digamaras Island of Iloilo. Now, he hid there for so many years until things got better and he got out. And at the time that he started his monastery in Ilocos Sur, which eventually named the Christ of the Desert Monastery, I had the good fortune of seeing him when he was putting up that monastery, the Christ of the Desert. So I saw what you would call this idea of life lived in earnest. Our life with the transcendent and the holy need not be something extraordinary. It's really so ordinary. And several days before he died, 2 years ago, I had the good fortune of exchanging messages with him days before he died. He put up that monastery, the Christ of the Desert Monastery. And we have here samples, okay, of what that monastery is all about. If you think of this monastery in Europe, big walls, thick walls, that is not the monastery of Father Rabang's Christ's, okay, in the desert. These are actually bamboo walls. It's thatch roof. Because that is exactly that community that he was in the middle of the desert. These are fisher folk. These are people who live from day to day and depend on the cats for their survival. That is your Abbot Rabang. Talk about the holy, talk about the transcendent, talk about God. This is it. Talk about dialogue. This is it. Okay, so we see these people. Next slide, please. Next slide. Can we go before that? Okay. Now, I was talking about martial law, right? And you know these pictures. These are what we call the forever pictures of EDSA people power that I've got to tell you about. This everydayness of our faith, that where we see God, the holy, the divine. I was taking up moral theology when EDSA People Power 1 came about. Of course, we didn't know it's EDSA People Power 1, just simply EDSA. And my professor was Father Pablo Gomez. At that time, Father Frederick Permin was done with his being a rector. The current rector at that time, I will not tell his name, of course he's a Dominican, told us not to go to EDSA. The dean of my college, I will not tell you where I was, wrote a memo that if you go to EDSA, you will face the consequences. I saw this drama and the dynamic of power in this university. I was here at Santo Tomas when EDSA People Power 1 really broke loose. I saw Father Permin, Father Pablo Gomez heading the line to that march to EDSA. We were having classes. I told my students, I will check the attendance there. With the priests at the front line, we went there. We did not follow our rector, Maximus. I did not follow my dean. God bless us all. There was one thing that I saw at EDSA People Power 1. By the second day, we don't have food any longer. We were so thirsty, we were so hungry. I saw one thing. The sisters and other people were giving bread, really bringing food to these people who never left EDSA. You talk about the breaking of the bread. I saw how a pandesal could become 4 because there's not enough food when we were there. A pandesal becoming 4, becoming 5. That's breaking of the bread. Let's talk about the holy. That's it. Okay, now, my assumption here is that we don't have to look for the extraordinary to speak about the holy that is a tremendously holy, is in fact part of the mystery, which is called by Otto as the Mysterium Tremendum. Remember, in Otto's sense of what the holy is all about. I saw the tragic also. Mark, if I'm talking so much, you tell me I'm done with my 40 minutes, okay, Mark? So we can open it to the discussion later on, okay? I was given only 39 minutes. Okay, so I will follow the rules, right, Mark? Yeah? Okay. Now, I became witness to what we call the killing of priests. And at a certain point, when I was doing a novel, I wrote a novel on priests being murdered. And the novel is Tangadang, which means war. And I had to see the place where the priest Nilo Valerio was beheaded, and the 2 others also were beheaded. They were, in fact, buried on shallow ground, and eventually their bodies, their remains, not seen afterwards. I said I could not write the chapter without going to the place where they were killed and they were buried. So I went to Bakun, and if you are aware of that, there is a book that documents what happened to them. This is called the Bakun Martyrs, Nilo Valerio. You know what the soldiers did, whose salary we are paying? They beheaded the priests, put his head at stake, and displayed it in front of the town hall for the public to see. That's not the first and the last. So many other priests, so many other sisters, seminarians were killed in the process. What is this faith that tries to give witness to the extraordinariness of our ordinary lives? How do you explain that? I don't know. So you can recount, for example, Tulio Pabali, killed by Manero, Conrado Balweg, Zacarias Agatep. Many of these really are people from the north. So, when I read Carreto and Foucault and also Merton, these things come to my mind, these things about how, for example, the Ilocano people talk about this idea of the mysterium tremendum. And there is a word for the Ilocano people for that, amanga, we call that. When amanga happens, you just simply are stupefied and you don't know what to say next, you don't know what to do next. You are just so shocked and surprised. Word would not come. And so when you have that, the one that is the author of that kind of an awe is called the holy, which the Ilocanos would say, mangam amanga, the one who does this to you, because you are now awestruck, and no word would flow from your mouth, from your lips. And so, which means, when you go back to what you would call this ordinariness of our lives, I already told you that there is what you would call this document, this empirical data that would tell you that these things are real for these ordinary people. When this guy that I told you, Bing Bong Crisologo, when he was done with his absurdity and extremism, he was put to prison, right? Because he was running after now Abot Rabang, and then he became a Catholic charismatic leader. Catholics out there, remember, they are using your name. In the prisons, the official name of that group, the charismatic group, that turned this Bing Bong Crisologo into a preacher and an evangelist, is the Love Flock Catholic Charismatic Community. He used your name. Of course, we know, eventually he became a politician, both in Ilocos Sur, where he comes from, and in Quezon City also, where he lives. Now, I am coming up with all these examples for you to see that this now leads me to what you would call this idea of how do you make sense in an empirical way what these things are in terms of the holy that is grounded on what you would call the everyday reality of the lives of people. Now, I am doing 3 field work concurrently, and these are among the Ilocanos, among the Ifugao people, and among the Kalinga people. The one that I'm wearing right now is a gift from the Kalinga people. Of course, I bribed my tailor so I can wear it, right? This is a G-string, so I turned it into like this. All right, and when they will ask me, I will wear this before they may know, I have your G-string now sewn into like this one. Now, what am I saying? I am saying that the ordinariness of the holy is in fact found in the everyday, and among these 3 people in northern Philippines, you must understand that the country is a diverse country. Almost 2/3 of that diversity is found in northern Philippines. There are in fact 48, 49 ethno-linguistic groups in northern Philippines, and the lingua franca is Ilocano. People of religion down there, you've got to go back to the ground. Okay? Stop reading only the Vatican Council II document. Let's go to the field. There are 2 things I'm going to be bringing out into the open, and this kind of what we call this linking of the experiences of the Ilocano, the Ifugao, and the Kalinga people. 2 things. Word, number 1 is the word apo. Those of you who have been terrorized by the Marcos regime, not this regime today. I know there is somebody from the office of the president. No, it was the old one, okay? So, this apo. In the dictionary, there are 8 meanings of apo, but this apo that I'm talking about and written in a capital letter is in fact the term for the holy. We don't need the Western word Diyos to mean the God. We say apo. So get it. So we have the empirical data for the holy. And I'm presenting this because we have an evidence. There's another one. This is called Buni, which eventually would be borrowed by the Tagalog-speaking people. The Buni is the god of many of these northern Philippines ethno-linguistic groups. It's the god of the Ilocanos, the god of the Ifugao people, the god of the Kalinga people. That's why when you say Kabunian, the Kabunian is an inflected word from a root word which is Buni, Ka meaning plenitude, An is actually the condition or the status of what you would call this original word. That's why in your Tagalog there is kabunyan. There you go. You have evidences from the ground of this what you call the holy. Now, how do you now begin to understand that the holy is only reflected upon, meditated upon by the Western people? Most of them have Agcaoili nose, and the skin is so fair because even if they don't do the papaya soap, they still are white, that they need a tanning lotion to be able to come to Hawaii. Otherwise, if they go to Hawaii with their white skin, we will call them colonizer. Yes. So if you want to join us for the NACAM conference in November, on November 12 to 15 next year, please be sure that you are as brown as I am. Otherwise, you will be accused of being a colonizer. What I'm saying here is that this one, I'm now going into what we call the Indo-Pacific. You have to understand that part of my work at university is going to be now to run 16 programs. Most of these programs really are programs that have been what you would call a product of colonization. That's why my talk, really I talk about how do we even understand the holy outside of the received idea of the holy. Outside of that idea, so that in the end we can go back to our people, and for once and for all, we are connected to the very people that we are supposed to be serving. You tell me. I'm working with 16 colonized programs in my university. How to purge that colonial mind? When you talk to a Filipino philosopher, they are so good at quoting Derrida, Barth, and somebody else. But they never know about their own people. Among the Ilocanos, before they even begin to tell the story of their epic, they invoke this apo. And they sing that invocation. It's a cantata. Oh, apo, isurunak. That's a singing, the offering to the God. Of course, you don't know this, right? Good for you. Now, I am now going to this idea now about Dawkins and Persig. These two people really, you don't need to read them. Dawkins, among others, said that the idea of God is a delusion. This Persig, you probably have read his bestseller, Zen and How to Maintain Your Motorcycle, right? That Zen guy. Persig, who had a schizophrenic condition, talked about when one has this kind of a problem and you are only one, you are called insane. When there are many of you having the same problem of believing in God, that is called religion. I would say, Dawkins, stop. Persig, go to hell, if there is one. Because when you go back to what you would call trusting, where are we now? Thank you. This idea of the westernized. And then we take this Western idea of the holy as the be-all and end-all without trusting our own people. Probably we are in the wrong. Right? In February 2014, on my sabbatical, I went to Valencia, Barcelona, and Madrid, and everywhere else in Spain to look for some sources on what you would call archival data of what we are. What did they did to destroy us, the Spaniards? That was because I had a problem. Everybody in Ilocano scholarship was talking about the Doctrina Christiana that was published in 1621, but I saw that that is wrong. The older version is really 1620. And that, in fact, prompted me to go back to Spain and say, hey, let me figure out. You know, what I found in Valencia, they are still doing what you will call this, the falias, they call it. They would have what was caricature of people and all that. They will be burning it at stake, and they will be so happy after they burned them in front of the ayuntamiento. The ayuntamiento in Valencia is actually the city hall. Talk about medieval Spain in 2014. And talked about medieval Spain when they came in 1521, and then when they came back in 1564, 44 years after. And so my call here is, what about if we go back to this understanding of how we can trust our people again? And so, next slide, please. So that question, don't we have anything for ourselves? Why is it that we are going to be dependent only on the West? Okay, next slide, please. This is now the idea of NACEM, okay? NACEM, for the Ilocano and these other groups of people that I'm talking about, as part of my fieldwork, is a rich concept that can mean consciousness, reason, will, the will of God, and so on down your line. There is an expert on NACEM in this house, and the name is Danilo Alvarado. If you want to know more about that, you must read his book. Okay, let's go back to his book. There's a book in there. That's the NACEM. And I would say I, again, reread Father Mercado, and he was wrong in his elements on Filipino philosophy and elements on Filipino theology when he was talking about the Ilocano experience. He was wrong. I reread him. In fact, the idea in the Ilocano philosophy that it is the buot loob is equivalent to Ilocano NACEM, it's wrong. The Ilocano equivalent is puot. So Mercado is wrong. And so, what do? We have to trust our people again and check with Dr. Altero how he did it after writing a dissertation on whoever is that Kant guy is all about. Did you write a dissertation on Kant? I don't know. I'm just joking, all right? So, what we need to do is this idea of the Holy, when we talked about dialogue, one condition for the dialogue is we got to trust each other again. Talk as people. Talk as colonized people wanting to be free. Let's do it. The idea of soul, by the way, in the West, I checked, is not soul per se. I did a reading of that when I was younger, and I lambasted everyone who didn't know what they were talking about. And it's, in fact, originally from the German, which means water. Soul is originally water. Now I understand why the Ilocano people, when they have their dead, they have to think about death as the movement of the dead person from one shore of that one part of the river to the other part of the river. This is that kind of movement. That's why for the Ilocanos, there is a boatman. And when there is someone who is dead among Ilocanos, there normally are coins that's going to be paid to the boatman. So soul is water. When you want your soul to survive, do that. Move to the water. Now, I get that. And so the dialogue now is this question. This religion, science, and culture. The question is, whose science you're talking about? The science of Persig, who is a chemist, or the science of Dawkins, who is a biologist? So, friends, I'm not anti-science. I told you I'm a social scientist too, in one way or the other. But whose science you talking about? So, it's not only science, But the second problem is what to do with science. And religion, whose religion you're talking about. And number three, whose culture you're talking about. We have to ask those questions. And so, next slide please. Let's just not say it. Let's walk the talk. Let's walk the talk. That's the deal. Okay, next slide. Now, I reiterate this idea. Don't believe in that lie that all we need is STEM. No, because otherwise we are going to be creating a world that has no conscience. Next slide, please. Mark. And therefore, I reach the point because otherwise Mark is going to kick me out. I say now, mahalo nui loa, salamat kadiyaw, and Dios mabalos. Lisa, lai ka magpararibok, pararibok ka ng pararibok, ha? Do not say that to Dennis. Dennis will never understand my Bicol, okay? Dennis, ask Lisa what it means, okay? Dai ka magpararibok man, Dennis. Pararibok ka ng pararibok. Yeah.
Dr. Agcaoili, please stay on stage. Thank you so much, Professor Agcaoili. That was indeed provocative and engaging. Perhaps at this point, there are questions in your mind you would like to engage Dr. Agcaoili. Any question from the online participants? How about the on-site participants? Do you have questions?
Lisa has. Lisa has. And Dennis has. And Jason Hernandez has. Jason, it's time for revenge. Come on. And there's another one, Dr. Tadeo. It's time for revenge. Come on. Roast me. I roasted them last night.
Anybody would like to challenge Dr. Agcaoili?
I'm here. Dennis, I beg of you, come on, don't embarrass me. I taught you political philosophy, come on. Where's Dennis? He ran away. Dr. C, where are you? They don't like me at all. They don't want to talk to me.
Questions or rejoinders? All right. Dr. Aguas.
My God, I'm feeling nervous now.
Good afternoon, Job Aguas from UST. Thank you very much, Professor Agcaoili, for your really thought-provoking presentation. I think one of the things siguro implied in your presentation is the or the biases of people when they engage in dialogue. We have our cultural biases. And sometimes those biases are, well, some of them are well-founded, some of them are just purely our own misconceptions of things. And as Filipinos, one possible source of our bias, perhaps, of the Westerners, is that they colonize us. But I think we also have to accept the fact that, meaning we have to accept our past. We cannot go back to the past and still complain about colonization, what the Western colonizers did to us, because I believe it's the our colonial past has already become part of who we are as a people. So I'm thinking, Professor, how can we, I don't know if you would agree with the question, how can we overcome this bias, this, so that we can move forward and engage in a more meaningful and fruitful dialogue? Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Dr. Aguas. I lost my nerves, so I'm normal now. Okay, thank you. All right. Now, I understand bias. In fact, when I did my thesis on the bias, my philosophy thesis, I really work on the problem of knowledge, Habermas, Gadamer, all those people that you have read yourself. And this is actually a concern in hermeneutics, in fact. But then if you go back to this question of bias with the synonym of prejudicio or prejudice, you must see that by that etymological, let's say, first step in the prejudice, in fact, is not in fact bad. Prejudicio is the first knowledge that needs to be corroborated, which in fact is still a synonym of bias. So meaning to say, is there anyone in this class, in this auditorium, this gallery, that has no bias? Come on. You being products of UST, you have built-in biases whether you acknowledge them or not. There is no historical person in the here and now that does not have it. The problem is, what do you do with the recognized bias? That's the problem. You already recognize them, you're not doing it. You're not doing anything yet. So that's the problem, Dr. Aguas. So what it means, therefore, is that when you bring in and we consume hook, line, and sinker what the colonizers did to us, then there is a problem, because when you do recognize the wrong things that they did and you are not doing anything about them to correct them, then you are in the wrong. Right? So biases could bring you to what you would call productive knowledge. But biases also, when you don't recognize them, can bring you to what you call perdition, to the knowledge that will bring you to hell, and I am sure I will see you there in hell. Yeah? You got the joke? No. Thank you. You didn't get the joke, okay? So that's the problem in there. And so my problem is, do we have to go back to what you would call the dream of primeval past? I mean to say, the past that has not been stained or blemished by any colonial, let's say, event. We can't go there. The time machine in science as in philosophy does not make sense. And that's going to be my next paper when you will have the conference again next year. I will falsify the time machine. The problem of time. Okay, what does it mean? Where do we begin in announcing the better gospel, the emancipatory liberative gospel to our colonized people? Acknowledge that there are external colonizing factors. At least 4. Is it 4? Come on, you forgot the British. They came for 2 years. Come on, 4. Right? Spaniards, the Americans who fooled us by pulling our legs, the Japanese and the British in between. Remember? The British wanted us too. We are the pearl of the Orient Seas. Come on. We could have been what you would call subjects of the Queen. Right? And learning how to curtsy. Right? Now, so what does it mean? Can we, in fact, purge ourselves from what we call the impurities of our colonial past? Oh, you can't. You can't. There's nothing you can do with it. Because time machine does not work. And it's not even true. Now, what do we do with what we have got right now? Okay, for example, San Pedro Cutud. Please, tell these people who in their desperation are going to Pampanga in Cutud and having themselves nailed during the Holy Week. That's scandalous, embarrassing, and in fact is plagiarism. There's no footnote, right? Yes or yes? You tell them, please, stop this crucifixion because it has become a touristy phenomenon. So many tourists are going to Pampanga every Holy Week because every tourist, one heck of a tourist is always like this. They only come to get something out of you, they will be leaving nothing. That's the problem of tourism that some other people did not understand in our conversation last night. All right? You can't. You can't. There was only one Christ, even if Apollo Kiboloy is saying he is the Christ, and he is God, and he is King, and now he owns the universe. No. So my point, Dr. Aguas, is this. No, we can't. But we have to be very serious with the biases that we can use to improve our understanding of ourselves, our neighbors, we call them the other people, and our world. So not every bias is bad, okay? Because it's always the starting point of how we, in fact, see the world and ourselves right off. When I'm in America, freaking America, I know I'm brown. And I'm talking to the white people. Hey, white person, don't look at me like that. I'm brown. I'm looking at you as white. What is our bias in Hawaii? Every white people is a colonizer. That's why. So when we call people in Hawaii haole, haole is the Hawaiian for the person that doesn't know how to breathe. No breathing. Haole. Haole. When you come to our conference next year and they call you haole, that is an embarrassment, okay? That means you don't breathe because they don't see the Hawaiian people because it's a tropical country, it's hot, you always have to keep on breathing. So we see your chest moving. But these white people, the chests are not moving, so that's why they're called haole, right? How come your chest is not moving? Okay, because you're white, all right? So this sort of thing. So I think our concern in this dialogue is that even science has its own bias. Come on. When you choose a specimen, come on. How come that kind of a frog is the one that you have chosen? The manner by which you are going to be controlling your laboratory, whether physical or social laboratory, you have already the biases. When you say, in your procedure, you've got to say, what are your assumptions? So that in the end, you can control your data, so that in the end, you can predict the outcome. Right? Which we did. Well, I took up my undergrad here. That's what we did in our physics class that has both theory and laboratory. We were, in fact, pulling the leg of our professor in laboratory. We were tinkering with the result. Did you do that? The 5-hour physics requirement for the BA in philosophy. Jesus Christ. With an engineer for a theory talking about gravity and the Skylab falling on Earth, and we had to compute when it is gonna get to Australia. God, okay? So this thing, so science is also cultural. In fact, it's so cultural that it has to keep on also asking itself, are you going now Kunian? The paradigm in Kun, its idea of the scientific knowledge, is something that we can learn from. When it does not work any longer, you've got to change your paradigm. So these sort of things we must always be aware of all the time. Religion is part of what you would call the consciousness apparatus of any community, and therefore it is essentially cultural. So we need to acknowledge all these things, and that was a wonderful talk. Dr. Aguas, when you stood up, I said, oh my God, I'm going to hell, okay?
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Dr. Agcaoili. There's still one more. No more? Oh, Joseph.
Good afternoon, Doc Agcaoili. Thank you for your candor. I was fascinated by your etymological wrestling of the idea of Apo and Nakem, and it reminds me of the project of Heidegger. Basically, when he claims that language is the house of being, he does not only refer to the German language, but to all languages. And I'm curious because with your proposal, or rather with your invitation to consider this, the Ilocano language as a basis of our relationship with being, how does it affect? Yeah, the northern, or as the language of the gods. But kidding aside, how does it affect, for example, the idea of imagined community? Because basically, we cannot avoid that the Philippines is made out of 100 ethno-linguistic groups, which some Filipinos would mistake as dialects, but there are different ethno-linguistic groups. And even in our politics, we imagine along ethnic linguistic lines. If you're Ilocano, if you're Bisaya, even among the Bisaya, they are Bisaya Cebu, Bisaya Mindanao. How does it affect how we envision ourselves as Filipino in that way? One route that I am reading right now is with Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt raised the idea that we cannot avoid the prejudice of racial thinking because with the mere fact that we are born into a world, how we look and how we receive our language, it's okay. It's racial thinking is the default of how humans think, but it becomes racism when we don't really engage, or we just thoughtlessly engage with the language instead of wrestling with the language. So I'm curious. There's the danger. There's the opportunity to see to imagine a better community, but also I'm curious how would we wrestle with the dangers of racial of this ethno-linguistic pride transforming into something that be problematic. And it reminds me of the problem posed by Rizal in his character between Padre Florentino and Simon, when Padre Florentino said, what would we do if the colonizers, the slaves of yesterday will be the colonizers of today? And I'm really curious what are the paths of exploration for those?
Thank you, Dr. Joseph. Right. The question is a bit complicated. I'm going to be deciphering it like a frog. Okay, so I'm doing a laboratory analysis now. Okay, first off, I'm bringing in, for example, your understanding of Benedict Anderson's imagined community. Okay, Anderson, of course, is operating from what we call the experience in America and, of course, experience in Indonesia, where he was, and when he adopted a son and so on until he died. Okay, now, okay, supposing Indonesia is the sample, the imagined community. You know what what did they do to come up with what we call quote-unquote national language? Indonesia is one of the multilingual countries. You know what they did? They did not take the elegant language of the Japanese, which in fact is a primordial language of that kind of a part of Southeast Asia. What they did instead is get a minuscule minority language and develop this Bahasa into what you call the language of the nation. What did we do in the Philippines? We lied, hook, line, and sinker to our people, and you can check my dissertation on this, and it's online, The Lies of the 1934-1935 Constitution. It's in Cebuano, and it's also in English. What did we do in the Philippines? Quezon in cahoots with Recto, they lied to us big time. The idea is that this is the 1930s. This is the time of Nazism. Remember, people, Nazism has infected Italy, France, Spain, of course, Germany. What does it mean? In Nazism, there is a national everything. Imagine Italy with its own many languages eventually coming up because there is a despot in Italy. There is an unknowing, ignorant man in France after the Les Miserables in what we would call the French Revolution. what did they do? To homogenize everyone, which we are in fact doing in the Philippines. You are a Filipino, pues, you speak Tagalog. Teka muna, that's Tagalog? No, it's Filipino now. This is Gago because that Romero Gago, who was the Secretary of Education in the 1950s, oh, the Cebuano people really are protesting, so let's not call this Tagalog anymore as Tagalog, but Filipino with a P. Is that not Gago? It is Gago. You talk about belonging, inclusion, diversity, and justice. Do not exclude. Find ways to include so that people can belong with their difference, and then we create and imagine a better country for us all. This country has become a country of Tagalog-speaking people. We call Filipino-speaking. Please, feel guilty. You are complicit.
All right,
This is
thank
not
you.
language justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
We are running out of time for the next session.
All right.
Thank you, Dr. Agcaoili. May I request Brian now to...
Thank you, Doc Dexy. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. To manifest our gratitude, we would like to present the Certificate of Appreciation to Professor Dr. Agcaoili. May we request Professor Agcaoili to remain on stage to receive that certificate and token of appreciation. And also, we would like to request Professor Joel C. Sagut and Professor Job Jim Aguas to award the certificate. The certificate reads, Pontifical and Royal University of Santo Tomas, the Catholic University of the Philippines through the Center for Theology, Religious Studies and Ethics, Institute of Religion, Ecclesiastical Faculties, and the Philippine National Philosophical Research Society present this certificate of appreciation to Professor Aurelio S. Agcaoili, Ph.D., for generously sharing his knowledge as a keynote lecturer presenting a paper entitled The Divine is Never Dead, Faith and Reason in the Age of Science, Technology and Culture, during the John Paul II International Conference with the theme God and the World, Dialogues on Culture, Religion, and Science, held on June 26 to 28, 2024, at the Thomas Aquinas Research Complex, University of Santo Tomas, Manila, Philippines. Signed, Professor Joel C. Sagot, Ph.D., Director, Center for Theology, Religious Studies and Ethics, Professor Job Jim S. Aguas, Ph.D., Executive Governor, Philippine National Philosophical Research Society, and Reverend Father Herminio V. Dagohoy, O.P., Ph.D., the Dean of the Faculty of Philosophy. Once again, Josti Agnina po, maraming salamat po. At this point, we shall first have our 15-minute health break. You may proceed, of course, to our full station at the second floor, but please be reminded to be back at exactly 3:15 so that we can proceed to our second plenary session. Maraming salamat po. May we ask Professor Joel Sagot of the UST Research Center for Theology, Religious Studies and Ethics to receive the Certificate of Appreciation as our co-organizer.
Absent kasi. Joke lang.